Hey everybody, Cole here with Classic Mini DIY. On today's episode, I'm going to put the engine back in the car. I'm going to give you guys a little time lapse on that, and then we're going to talk about oil coolers, so stay tuned. Alright, so on this episode of Classic Mini DIY, it's mainly focused on oil coolers. What are they for? How big should the oil cooler I get be? What are the pros? What are the cons? What should I do? Should I get an oil cooler? All that is going to be answered in this episode. Also, I'm going to give you guys a little time lapse of me putting the engine back into the car. However, I'm not really going to dive into actually how to put it back into the engine bay because, well, I've done it a couple times on this channel, and I think for right now, it's not really worth spending a lot of time on. Now, before we get started, two things. One, I've got some stickers from some people, and I just want to mention them real quick. I got a sticker from Minis in the Gong, which is from Australia. So that sticker made a long journey to Charlotte, North Carolina. So thank you so much, guys, for sending me that. And then I have another sticker from Paul Jeffries. His engine and gearbox building business right here, JPE. If you guys are in the UK and you're looking for a really top-notch job on an engine or a gearbox or anything related to these classic minis, hit up Paul. I put the links to both Minis in the Gong and Paul in the description of this video, so you can check those out. The other thing is super cool. It is another giveaway. So one of my viewers a little while back purchased one of the bespoke valve covers that I was selling on my merch store. I don't have any more of those in stock at the moment, but he decided that it would be a little too long before it would go onto his car, and he wants to give away that valve cover to one lucky person who watches the channel. So if you're interested in winning this valve cover, which probably popped up on the corner of the screen here, head over to the link in the description. That is going to allow you to enter and to win it. There's a few daily entries, and you know, if you guys have participated in a giveaway in the past, you guys know the drill. Daily entries, there's some one-time entries for subscribing, you know, things like that. And yeah, good luck to everybody. That giveaway is gonna last until the end of February, just a little bit before the end of February. So at the time of filming this intro, I've actually already installed the oil cooler on my car. So I kind of want to talk about the differences here, but before we go into actually installing it, how that whole process works. Now, there are a few different kinds of oil coolers. And when I say different kinds, I'm really talking about different size oil coolers and the way that the fittings work. So let's tackle the size of the oil coolers first. So there are a variety of different size oil coolers available for the Classic Mini. The general idea is that the more rows that you have on an oil cooler, the more cool the oil is going to get when air passes over those. So just think of it like a giant radiator except for your oil. And so with that, you might think, well, cooler is better, right? You want your oil to be as cool as it possibly can be. That will make your engine run the best. Well, that's not exactly the case, especially with these old minis. You don't want your oil to be overcooled, because what happens is the colder your oil is, the thicker it gets and the harder it is for your oil pump to actually push that oil through your system. So you're trying to find a perfect balance with an oil cooler. Now, the size that most people run on their Classic Minis is a 13-row oil cooler. This is going to be like the kind of sweet spot for someone who just wants to pick up an oil cooler and bolt it right on, or even someone who is getting this to cool their race engine on their race Mini Cooper. Now, with that 13-row oil cooler, you can see around a negative 10 degrees Celsius temperature differential. So what that means is you can see up to 10 degrees of cooling potential on your Classic Mini as the air is passing over that cooler and your oil is being pumped through the oil cooler, through the filter, through the whole system. Now, I actually had a 13-row oil cooler on my Classic Mini, and it served me very well. But one thing that I was not a huge fan of, at least with that oil cooler, was the actual lines that were running to that cooler. They were really, really rigid, and what that ended up doing is making it a much harder thing to work and change your oil, to work on the car. It all just got very tedious and frustrating. So before I took my engine back out, I actually took that oil cooler out and just got an MED filter kit. So one AN line coming from the filter housing up to the engine block. And that's a tidy little system. I was really happy with it for the 3 or 4 weeks that my engine was back in my car. But what I did end up noticing is that after a long period of driving, the oil became much more viscous. And what that meant is that, I lost a good amount of oil pressure. And I wasn't really happy with where that oil pressure would kind of come down to. So think of the oil, it was getting really hot, and thus it was not lubricating things as well as I wanted it to. Now, it probably is not a big deal, but I'm super detail oriented with these things, and I want all of the stuff to be really tight and tidy on my car for as long as it possibly can. So I tossed around a few ideas. Do I get another 13-row oil cooler, or do I try something a little bit smaller, maybe something that's not as big in front of the car? And so what I ended up with was an 8 AN fitting oil cooler, and it is only 10 rows. So it's a smaller oil cooler, so it takes up less room, and those AN fittings are much easier to work with. So I was able to use the 8 AN fittings that came from the MED filter kit, get an additional 8 AN line, and then I was able to run that up to my engine block, which I'm going to show you guys on the car here shortly. A lot of people probably think right off the bat, a 10-row oil cooler, well, that's not gonna do anything. I don't think that's necessarily the case. I don't think that a 10-row oil cooler is gonna be perfect for like a race car where you'd want a lot of cooling potential, but I think it's gonna be just right on a road car. It's gonna give me a little bit of cooling potential. So if we kind of map it out, you have this 13-row oil cooler, and that gives you up to 10 degrees Celsius of cooling potential. And then we move down to a 10-row oil cooler. You're losing just a small percentage of those rows, so I'm thinking that it'll probably give me about 6 degrees of cooling potential, which is still actually quite a bit cooler than the engine running with no oil cooler at all. So that's my kind of thought process. I'm really hoping this works. So one other thing that you'll find with oil coolers before I show you guys my setup is that you will see they will kind of range. You'll be able to find things with 10 AN lines, 8 AN lines, or if I remember correctly, 1/2-inch BSP lines. So keep an eye out if you decide to pick up an oil cooler. I have a few recommendations for coolers down in the description. So there should be one down there that fits your needs in the event that you are looking to do this to your car, but you're definitely gonna wanna match those things up. So I know that was a lot of talking and a lot of detail around these oil coolers, but let's head out to the car and I'm gonna show you guys how mine's set up, how you could install it in your car, and then how to prepare it before you start your car for the first time with an oil cooler. So let's head out there. All right, so what we're looking at here is, well, the 10-row oil cooler that I was mentioning just a moment ago. And you'll notice I have one AN line already connected on the left side here, and then I have this side disconnected. And now the reason I have that disconnected is because there's something you have to do when you install this oil cooler. But before we get into that, I just want to mention the way that this is installed. Now I know this isn't probably the prettiest, fanciest way you can install an oil cooler, but what we did here is we just cut a small little lip on the bumper here on both sides. And now keep in mind that the grill is going to go in front of this, so you can't actually see any of this from the front side of the car. But what we did is we then took that small lip and bent it backwards. Now this was done prior to painting the car. However, it has seen some wear and tear over the years, so don't judge me too hard here. Now, the way that I have this connected is the left side here is running from this 8 AN line up and through this 16-inch hose all the way up to the engine block right up here. Now on the other side, I'm gonna run a smaller hose from here just to the actual oil filter head. Now on the other side here, I'm just gonna run a smaller hose from here just to this filter filler neck right here. The hose that came with the kit from MED for just the oil filter kit, does kind of technically work, but it has a little bit too much binding in it. And in short, it just makes me a little uncomfortable. I just don't want this to be really bound up when it's connected here to here. So I got a smaller line. However, ultimately there was a small mix up and they accidentally put the wrong fitting on the other end of the hose here. Keep in mind that these hoses I actually got from a company called Race Flux. It's super cool. I'm really glad that I found their website. It's a little bit more expensive than, say, putting these hoses together yourself. However, the benefit is that now I know for sure this has been leak tested. This has been installed with good tools that I know work. So this ultimately is going to have two 90-degree fittings. So one here, like this, and the hose is going to come back around and connect up right in the back there. One short little jump from the filler neck over to the actual oil cooler. Now, the reason I have this disconnected for right now is because I'm priming my oil filter. So what that means is, well, just filling it up with oil. So you grab the motor oil that you're gonna be running in your car, and you're gonna need to fill it up here. I've tried a funnel. My funnel's not quite small enough to fit in this hole, so I am just being really careful. And I'm adding just a little bit of oil here. And of course, still making a mess. The basic goal here is to get this full of oil. Now, I've been doing this over the course of a few days now. The reason I've been doing that is just to allow the oil to settle down into the cooler, and then I can fill it up a little bit more. But I'm sure if you did this off of the car and you had like a bigger funnel, you could probably get some oil in there pretty quick. I'm just taking my time. But aside from that, there really isn't anything else you have to do in order to get this working. Now, I'm not gonna show you this connected up right now because I don't have the hose, like I said. But if you wanna follow me on Instagram, Classic Mini DIY 59, you'll get some updates on there and you can actually see this once it's all buttoned up and finished, getting put together. Okay, so that is gonna wrap up this episode of Classic Mini DIY. I hope that you found it educational for these oil coolers. You know, I've always wanted to kind of do something about the oil cooler on the Classic Mini, and I figured now would be the best time since I've got, you know, the car still kind of disassembled and going back together. If you have any questions or if you have any feedback about the kind of like idea I have around temperature differential on this, or you know what the best oil cooler for the Mini is, feel free to post that in the comment section below. I'd love to hear from you guys. Also, at the time of filming this oil cooler that I bought for my car actually is no longer available on Amazon. I'm not sure why they don't carry it anymore, but well, they don't have it anymore. So I've put some links down in the description to some oil coolers that 7 Mini carries that I think are awesome. They're like the 13 row, and they have some with AN fittings, with BSP fittings. There's a kit from MED Engineering, which is also a 13 row. The oil filter head kit, if you don't want to do an oil cooler. And then I've also put a link to the Race Flux website that I use to actually get these AN lines created. They're awesome. They didn't, you know, send me any of this stuff. I'm not sponsoring this video for them, but I really like their product. They sent me some really well-made hoses, and I'm excited to put those and test them out on my car. Now don't forget, like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, there is a giveaway going on for a bespoke valve cover that matches the one that I have on my car, donated by one of the viewers. If you are interested in winning one of those, head over to the link in the description. But I think the next video is hopefully gonna be a driving video, one that has the car all put back together. I might do another kind of like vlog style, or maybe a live session with you guys, you know, while I'm working on the car. I'm not really sure about that yet, but if nothing else, the next video will be the Mini driving. So very excited about that. However, until that episode drops, enjoy those Minis and motor on.